Hey everybody, it's Shaelene and Kathryn here. We're here for your third mini lesson on DBT, and we hope that the teachings this week on secondary targets and leaving team feeling satisfied has you on the road to really feeling like a DBT boss in your sessions and on your team. And if you haven't watched them, go dig back in your emails and find the emails from earlier this week where we talk about those two things, and we give you guys resources for managing secondary targets in your session. We have a cool checklist that goes along with it that's super helpful, and then a practice to help you get your team needs met more effectively with your consult teammates. And so we just hope that you've been using that, and we appreciate the comments and feedback from everyone that's already done that so far. So for today, in our last lesson, we're talking about something that's super important: environmental intervention. And I would say in doing consulting and supervision for my own team and for other DBT therapists, this is something that definitely comes up a lot. I think that one of the tenets of DBT that a lot of therapists remember really well is consultation to the patient, right? And it's almost like, oh, consultation to the patient. I can't get involved here because I'm consulting to the patient. But one of the things that I think often gets missed is when a therapist gets really rigid in the position of consultation to the patient, it actually burns them out a lot more because they're so focused on being hands off. And I think in a way, it almost becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy of, wow, this case is really burning me out. The environment is so chaotic, but I have to consult to the patient and I need to observe my limits. And so I'm not going to touch anything. And then meanwhile, the life of that client kind of snowballs and things get worse and worse and worse. And so today we're here to talk about a process and practice to help you understand when to actually intervene with the environment to make things feel a lot less chaotic with your DBT clients.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I think, first of all, I feel like the work of DBT is, as all things in the world, is complex. Like, we're working with clients who are not, they are not separate from their environments. We talk about them as two entities. There's the client and then there's their environment. But the reality isn't so. Like, actually, their environment and them are intertwined. We are intertwined with them, and we are also intertwined with their environment, whether we see it or not. There's a way in which, if I make a change, even though I only see my client individually, if I make a change in therapy, it will have this ripple effect that will change their environment. Or if their environment, someone in their environment changes because they are intertwined with my client, I'm going to notice it, and it might, impact me in a certain way. So I think dialectics comes in to help us understand actually how interconnected we all are, and it helps us make sense of actually how complex working with clients can be because of the nature of their connection to their environment and vice versa. And I just want to say, if you as a therapist find yourself overwhelmed or in any way like stretched by the demands that the environments of your clients might pose for you, whether it's like directly stated or it's just sort of this implied, like, I often feel sometimes with clients where I just feel like the weight of like all the hopes, like especially if you work with teens, you get this where you can just feel all of what the parents want you to do. And you just feel like it's this weight on your shoulders when you're with your client and you see their side of things, you see what they want or don't want, but then you're weighed down by all this like demand that the parents might be saying or not saying, but that's sort of out there in the ethos that makes you feel a little stressed about, like, you got to get the kid to get up and go to school, even though they don't want to go to school, or, whatever it may be. So if you are experiencing that sort of overwhelm or a little like weighed down by all the demands, I just want you to know that it's very normal, and it is a product of the nature of this sort of like interconnected experience that we have as humans. It's not a product of you doing something wrong or the environment doing something wrong or the client doing something wrong. It's just that actually all of these points of contact where different people, therapist, parent, psychiatrist, client, their best friend, their partner, whoever it is, all of these people are sort of intersecting at different points. And each of those points gets tension, right? There's like the wants and desires of one side, the wants and desires of the other side. And these are, there's both validity and truth on either side, and then tension, right? So what you're experiencing makes perfect sense. And yet it can also be very uncomfortable. I mean, as Shaelene is saying, you can feel kind of pulled on one side. Like I know early in my career, and it sounds like similar for you, Shaelene, I definitely had that mantra of like, consultation to the client first in the back of my mind that actually, and I think some ineffective ways reinforce some avoidance. Like I didn't want to get involved with environments because they were stressful. Like it would mean too many demands on me. It would like cost me more time or energy in ways that that kind of like had me uncomfortable, and I couldn't always identify quite why it was uncomfortable. And so this statement, like consulting to the client first, was sort of like a get out of jail free card. We're like, I don't have to get involved with all of that.
I was just thinking that, like a little wave. Well, I've got this little flag, so I didn't order this. I didn't need this. And I'm thinking about our food metaphors that have continued through it. Again, it kind of feels like, oh, no, I didn't order all of this. I didn't ask for all of this. And yet you're sitting there and your plate is overflowing with like all of these different options. And you're sitting there kind of stressed out, like, but wait, I didn't order this. I said I didn't order this. I said I didn't order this. And nobody's coming to move anything or change it. If anything, like the server's coming by and she's just heaping more food on your plate, and it's making you feel really unsettled and uneasy. And so, I think it's another mindfulness point where we have to pay attention to the fact of like, what is actually happening right now? Because just avoiding it and kind of saying consultation to the patient, I never ordered this plate of food, it's not making it go away.
Exactly. And meanwhile, all of those things, like your sort of inaction has an impact on the environment and the client. And the most troublesome way that this can happen is where the environment starts to get sort of fed up that you're not getting things done, or you're not making enough change for the client in a way that's going to make whoever it is in the environment happier or feel better. And then that puts like more pressure on the therapy. It puts more pressure on the client in ways that actually make things much worse. So inaction and sort of too much action, either end of the spectrum, can be really, problematic. Okay, here's the big thing. Environments, meaning all the people in the person's life, the client, and you as a therapist, you all just are as you are. The environment wants what they want. Parents want their kids to go to school, or parents want their young adults to get a job and get out of the house, or parents want, whatever it is that they might want for their offspring, their children, their adult children, whatever it may be. Partners want what they want. Clients want their environment to treat them in certain ways. Like all of this, there is validity on all sides of this. And our job really, I don't think, is about prioritizing who's more right or who's wrong or any of that. It's really working with these points of tension and figuring out how you can like loosen the log jams, like where the tension creates stuckness. Our goal is to not allow stuckness to get us stuck, right? Like it's going to exist. Those points of tension exist. And what we want to do is figure out, is there a way to kind of loosen this up for the environment, for the client, and for ourselves in a way that keeps therapy moving forward, that keeps the person free enough to move towards their goals, acknowledging that tension will always exist with their environments. And so I think figuring out how to notice and then navigate those points of tension that exist naturally, that are just fine, like they're not inherently bad, but they're just, they can lead to these stuck spots. Navigating those as smoothly as possible is really the goal. And so there's a couple of things that I think are required in order to do that, to navigate that well. And the first is understanding your own limits as a therapist and how those play in. So Shaelene and I did a webinar back in July of 2021, I think
So.
About, what's that?
I think so.
Around there. And this is a handout that came from that, that's we've updated just a little bit, but this is what I call the observing limits bullseye, which is where you imagine a bullseye here. And the goal, you're trying to kind of hit the middle of this, is where you are doing things in your work as a therapist that are highly sustainable. This is the green zone stuff. This is behaviors that can occur regularly, the kinds of stuff that you could do in your professional life on a regular basis that don't lead you to feel overwhelmed, stretched too thin, being in situations where you don't feel comfortable or confident. I'm thinking about, like, I've had many times where I've been asked to go to meetings at schools, or like in settings with clients where it's like, this is really not my wheelhouse. Like, it's not a thing where I feel like I have the skills or qualifications to do the role that I'm asked. And if I could be there in a different role or in a different way that's more in my wheelhouse, it would feel just fine. So the green zone is like, what is that level where you feel like, okay, this is my role. This is a role that I can sustain, that I feel comfortable and competent doing. And those are things you want to like shoot for, right? This is where you're aiming. So when it comes to working with your environments, you have to figure out what are the things that feel really spot on. Like I've worked with clients who have a lot of conflict with their partner. And there are some occasions where I might have a partner come into session and we might do a joint chain together. But doing couples therapy is out of my wheelhouse. And I've had many times where therapists or where clients are asking, like, please, we need this couples therapy. And I'm like, I got to refer you. And the demand, for good reason, might be that they want me to do it because they know me or I know more of the history or something. But it is not a sustainable solution. And this goes beyond just like the question of like, ethically, would it be my role as their individual therapist? But it's like, even just within myself, even if I felt like, there would be a lot of pros for the client for me to do X, Y, or Z, if it goes outside of what I'm comfortable with and it's not in my green zone, then I've got to figure out how to reduce that and how to be able to say no and make a good plan for, where I might refer, how I might help that client meet their own need. It's not like dependent on me being the one who's doing it.
Yeah, it makes me think of the difference between wants and needs when it comes to that, right? Like I might want to because my client wants me to, and because I can understand their side and know that there are pieces of what they're saying that would make sense and that it would be really helpful. And yet, if I don't do it, what's hinging on that? Things will probably stay the way that they are to some degree in their relationship, but there's also the possibility of referring them out to a couples therapist, which, is a need in that couples therapist wheelhouse. Like that is something that they need to do because that is what they're trained for. And that's where all of their expertise lie. And so, yeah, I'm just thinking of a staff member who brought up on consultation team the other day that a client of theirs was really having a lot of anxiety about their bat mitzvah coming up and how the family asked the therapist to meet with a rabbi. And it was like, okay, let's zoom out here and assess the wants and the needs and where you fit in this as the DBT therapist. So it is really easy to, because your clients are asking and because families are asking and, they're asking in ways that are often very effective. And oftentimes we want to do everything we can to help them. And yet we have to be really mindful of what might pull us out, not only of our zone in terms of what feels good and what feels right, but also where we're going to be the most effective. And so I can just totally identify with that. And I know a lot of other people do as well.
And I just want to say too, like sometimes I think it's harder for me to respond when I have a client who's asking really effectively.
Of course.
To sort of observe my limit. But there's also times where really ineffective ways of asking are so difficult to tolerate and to say no to as well, because they might be paired with like intensity of like escalated behaviors or things like that on the part of client or the environment, other people in their lives, that it can also be difficult to say no. And you might find yourself stretching your limits in ways that are really unsustainable because you are uncomfortable. And we want to avoid that as well, because not only does that lead you to burnout, but will likely end up inadvertently reinforcing really ineffective behaviors. So with this point, observing your limits, like I said, you're aiming for the green zone. Those are the things where you feel like it's something you can do regularly in your work. It feels comfortable for you and it's helpful. It's not reinforcing ineffective behaviors. When you get into the yellow zone and orange zone, you might notice things that kind of stretch you a little bit. Like I notice oftentimes if I'm working with a teen or a young adult where there's family members that might want a lot more contact than I'm comfortable with. It's not in my green zone. It doesn't feel like totally easy and natural in my relationship with the client. but it's not necessarily inappropriate, or it's not something that I feel incompetent to do, or it's like not in my wheelhouse. It's totally part of it, but it may just be at a level that I'm like, this is more than what I want. So I'm going to have to observe that limit and be communicating with the, the family member, whoever it is, about that, and, confronting it directly as I need to. And then of course there's red zone things. So a good example of this is I've had clients who will ask me to ask their someone in their family or in their environment to do something differently. And it's really outside of, I think it has some ineffective qualities as well, in the sense that the client doesn't actually learn how to get their environment to change in an effective way. I will say there's been times where I think there's validity in the ask, and yet it's it really pushes a limit for me that's like really not where it becomes sort of a demand that it's like, I really need that to stop. And so those are ones that I'm going to be a lot more deliberate in getting them addressed quickly and efficiently. So those I'd put in that red zone category. So this is, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about observing limits and how this bullseye applies, Shaelene, I think, will drop in the chat box a link to that original webinar that we did on that. This, I think I just wanted to bring it up in this context because I think complicated and complex environments that our clients are existing in often will pull and push your limits here and there. And so being aware of it and knowing how you're going to address that, having a plan for that is a big part of it. The next thing I just want to talk about is the importance of being really mindful about your level of environment, because as Shaelene brought up, like there's sort of these two poles, right? There's the one pole is in, I think, some ways of thinking about DBT, therapists can get sort of in this, like, don't get too involved in the environment, let the client change it. It's sort of like you stand back, but you recognize the client is a whole in their environment, like they're not a separate part. So you have at least that much knowledge, but you act as if you're a separate part. And I don't think that's as helpful. Like that's sort of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is to be like very involved, where you're sort of like directing things in the person's environment, and you're up in everybody's business in a certain way. And I would suggest that neither end of this spectrum is like a great place to be. We've got a nice little dialectical tension growing between these two. And so the solution that I would bring to this is just practicing mindfulness. So I've got a handout here I'm going to walk you through that might help. So this has a series of questions that you could go through, like with your team, that asks you to think about or to just bring some mindful attention to the process of intervening in an environment. And this is specifically like if you're going to directly intervene. So the first thing is you want to get clear on what the change is that's desired. So your client is dealing with their partner, and their partner wants them to, or maybe their partner is very invalidating of them, and the client wants the partner to change. They want them to stop being so critical or so invalidating. So that's the desired change. The second question asks you to list the skills that that person would need in order to do that intervention themselves. Like, how could they actually get that environment to change, and what skills would they need to use? And then the question next is, do they have those skills? Or if they do they need to be strengthened? So that gives you like your first target, right? So they don't have the skills, or those skills are kind of not very strong, then you got to teach them, or you got to strengthen them. And then you can kind of step back and say, are there other factors that I may have missed? Are there things that I'm not paying attention to that would make it very difficult for them to be effective in intervening with their environment? And then can those be problem solved? Is there anything that my client and I can do that will impact their success without me directly intervening? And then are there consequences that I don't intend that would come to play if I did intervene directly? So for example, if I go ahead, my client, wants their environment to change. They want their partner to be less invalidating. They have the skills, I've strengthened them, but I just know that their partner has a lot of other things going on that makes it really difficult to hear from my client directly. And maybe it would be helpful if I was to speak on their behalf. There are ways in which that could be, but there are also unintended consequences of that. It could really reinforce potentially like some active passivity or something like that, that I just want to be paying attention to and get my team helping, another set of eyes to kind of see from all sides. And then this last question, you might take to your team to think about what other perspectives there may be. So you can kind of, as you move forward, like you're paying attention to all of the different sides and intervening wherever it feels like it's beneficial. It really changes the environment in a positive way. And then not if it doesn't. So I hope this is a helpful starting place, little like jumping off point.
Okay, so we will send this handout along with the video that Kathryn referenced from last year when we did some teaching on observing limits, specifically geared towards protecting you DBT therapists from getting burnt out. You might find that helpful and take some time to watch that. It is a little bit longer. I believe that one's like an hour long, but it's there for you to watch whenever you need it. In the meantime, keep your eyes peeled for the next email that comes out. Kathryn and I talk endlessly about this stuff. And one of the things that comes up is like, there's no shortage of information when it comes to being a DBT therapist, right? Like it's a complex modality, and the clients that we treat in DBT have very complex lives, and they come with a lot of problems that need like an expertise level when it comes to being able to not only handle them, but handle them in a way that really catapult your clients to like thriving in life, like not just making it by. And Kathryn and I were having a conversation just earlier this morning around like helping therapists to not just feel competent in what they do, but to really feel like they can come into a session, have a strong game plan, but also be ready to pivot and keep that sustainable in being a DBT therapist. It's really hard to do. We hope that these 3 teachings this week have helped with that. And we also know that there's just so much more to learn. So like I said, keep your eyes peeled for the next email. We're going to have some information about what next steps you might take on your journey towards becoming that version of yourself as like the best DBT therapist that you can be, not only for your clients, but like making that fit in the life that you want to live, right? Because it's really, really hard work. For now, if you like this video, or if it resonates with you and you found this practice helpful, please share it with someone else who can use it, or reply to this email and let us know how it's been going. But until then, we will see you in our next email. Take care.
Bye.